Mr. Speaker, members of the House, I have read this resolution over and over again, and I've heard the responses on the floor, and I have brushed up on my law school classes about Roe versus Wade, and I can only come away with one impression, which is that this is among the most extreme and ideologically driven constitutional amendments among any that have been proposed in the nation. There are a myriad of reasons to oppose this resolution. And there's so many things that we could talk about. We could talk about how, despite the answers we heard, this resolution absolutely obliterates parental rights, hook, line, and sinker. It would supersede any state law we have, and it includes minors, and it absolutely would get rid of parental consent and parental notification. Any lawyer or anybody who's ever been in a court knows how easy it is to make these arguments, and given this language, that's a slam dunk. So if you wanted to cut parents out of the process, if you wanted to cut parents out of one of the most important decisions that a young woman could possibly face, this amendment would be the way to do it. We could talk about how this amendment erases even the possibility of some of the most common sense guardrails around health and safety, given its broad language. We could talk about how if you're creating a positive fundamental right to something, that very clearly opens the door to taxpayer funding of it, because if it's a positive fundamental right, you're not going to discriminate against somebody just based on the fact that they can't afford it. We could talk about how it will allow for the latest of late-term abortions with only a mental health reason. That's all. That's all, for a perfectly viable child. We could talk about how the term reproductive freedom is not defined anywhere, and as we all know, could mean almost anything. Mr. Speaker, this is not a narrowly tailored bill, nor does it reinstate Roe versus Wade. In fact, it goes far beyond, and it's extreme in every possible way. So, Mr. Speaker, I think we could go more in depth on each and every one of these points, but frankly, I think the House is already aware of them. So I want to set those aside for a second. Mr. Speaker, I think on this issue, we have debated it so much in our lives and heard about it so much that frankly, I think we can't see clearly anymore. We have all become so entrenched in our lines of thinking that we sometimes forget to ask the most simple question of all, which is what exactly are we talking about and who exactly are we talking about? Mr. Speaker, there is a lot in life I don't know. In fact, I'm confident there's a lot more in life that I don't know than I do know. But I do know just a couple things. I know that I've had half a dozen foster kids in my house, each and every one of which have come from unbelievably difficult circumstances. And I know that despite those circumstances, the world is a better place for each and every one of them being here. I know that origin stories do not dictate destiny. I know that my 5-year-old son, who was adopted through foster care, he had no business being born by the world's standards. He didn't have any business at all being born, but in fact he was. And I know that he's one of the most joyful kids I have ever known, and he's brought unfathomable joy to me. Mr. Speaker, I know what it's like to sit in a hospital and hold my own child, miscarried 16 weeks after conception. And I know what it's like to see their face and see their fingers and see their toes, and to have no doubt what it is that was in my arms, a child. Mr. Speaker, what I know is that humanity is always better when we respect the individual person and we see the image of God in them, and when we live up to the creed that all are indeed created equal, endowed by a creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life. I'm asking the House today to try to break out of our entrenched thinking and to see that there's another side to this story and to see that there's another person involved. Mr. Speaker, this resolution is not only extreme, and it is, but the real problem with it is that it's fundamentally misguided because it refuses to open its eyes to the lives and futures of children. I ask the House to vote against this resolution.